Good afternoon to everybody, and welcome to the Engineering Talent Awards nominee interviews. This is a series of webinar interviews led by myself and Fayon Dixon in discussion with those who've been nominated at this year's awards. The awards were, of course, scheduled to take place in April, but due to the coronavirus pandemic, are now scheduled to take place on the 9th of September. A link to this and all the webinars will be available for sharing once each is complete. In the third webinar of this series, I'm here talking to Brittany Harris of Qualis Flow, who is nominated for Best Innovation of the Year. Qualis Flow is a construction technology company that helps contractors and major projects manage their social and environmental impact through the use of artificial intelligence. Through automated data collection and analysis on their digital platform, contractors save time, reduce costs, and enhance their reputation with the local area. So welcome, Brittany.
Hey, thanks for having me.
How are you?
Yeah, good. Surviving the interesting environment that we're in right now. But actually,
Yes.
I think the team are loving it in some ways. So it's been quite a nice experience.
Excellent. So just to explain the format again, I'm going to go through and ask some questions to Brittany, and hopefully we'll get a bit of a discussion going. And all the way through, if you want to submit any questions to the Q&A section, please do. And then I shall ask those towards the end. So let's get started. Quite a general question here, but I think really great to get us off the ground. What do you do as an engineer day to day for those listening?
Yeah, so day to day is probably quite different to, I mean, every engineering career is different, so I guess it's not super abnormal, but I run a software company. I still use a huge number of my civil engineering skills, but it is a mixture of working with our team, so making sure that everyone knows what they're working on, particularly as at the moment we're building out the product. So we have the basic functionality of Qflow as a software tool and a data science tool, but we're constantly adding on new features based on what the industry is telling us that they need. So basically filtering through all that feedback from the industry and trying to turn it into functional features that we can build into the product, and making sure we know which ones we want to do now, so prioritizing, and then which ones really tie into that longer term strategy. So there's a lot of communication with the team and with our clients on that. But also because I am, financially responsible for the company, I spend a fair bit of my time looking at our cash flow and understanding how we pay the bills, how we can pay our employees.
Always important.
But also understanding what this looks like for the industry moving forward, and where the opportunities are, not only to grow as a company, but to really affect change in an industry that we care a lot about.
Fantastic. So I suppose it's as much proactive as it is reactive, because of course, as things change, you have to develop new ways of managing that.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've learned a lot about being in a software company is how agile software development is compared to civil engineering. So civil engineering, it's very waterfall is the sort of management process it's called. So you set one task and then you do the next task and you work your way down quite a long list, and they're all connected by sort of clear milestones. Whereas the way that we work in software development, and something that we're trying to bring into the civil engineering world, is this agile process where you gather a lot more feedback and you respond to that feedback as much as possible and iterate much more quickly. And it's something that you see a lot in manufacturing, where you're building much smaller products, like a shampoo bottle, compared to a 26-story commercial building. But that agile, that iterative approach means that you can learn so much more quickly, and you can find opportunities to be more efficient, more productive, save costs, reduce environmental impact. And it's something that the civil engineering industry really struggles with, but it's something that we're very able to do in software development. And so we're trying to bring some of that lesson learning into the next, into the institution in the civil engineering space.
Amazing. So was this, and engineering as a whole, an industry that always interested you, or how did you and when did you come to it?
So to be honest, up to the age of 16, I wanted to go into musical theatre. And I mean, I still use so much of my theatre time talking to clients and engaging in the industry, so I don't regret that at all. I love it. But the reason I chose to go into civil engineering is I loved science. I loved problem solving. What I'd always done since a small kid, trying to find ways to fix stuff, break stuff and fix it again. And so I didn't want to go and work in a lab. I wasn't that kind of scientist. And I was really lucky that one of the teachers at my school, who didn't actually teach me, but he grabbed me one day and just said, have you thought about engineering? And I spent a lot of time digging into the different types of engineering and trying to understand which type was interested me most. And so I very nearly went into mechanical engineering because I wanted to work in renewable technology. I was obsessed with sustainability and making the world more sustainable. But then I ended up going to Uganda to volunteer for a charity out there. And the big things that really struck me was that life in Uganda was made so much more difficult because you didn't have basic infrastructure. So the roads were terrible, there was no telecommunications, water access, just getting access to water was such a huge part of everyone's day. They weren't able to spend time doing other things. And so I was trying to understand, how do we make the world easier for people so they can focus on the creative and the value add activities as opposed to meeting basic needs. And that was civil engineering. And that is all that civil engineering is building the fundamental bits of infrastructure that make life easy so that we can get on with being creative. And that just completely captured me, and I was like, right, I have to be in this industry. And that's why I very much fell into civil engineering.
Fantastic. So the slightly big question now, have you ever had to overcome adversity, and if so, can you explain?
I think everyone has to overcome adversity in whatever you're doing. So whether it's because you're younger than everyone else, or whether it's because you just look at the world differently. So I'm also dyslexic, which raises lots of interesting challenges. Like, my spelling is pretty hilarious at times, but it does also mean that I look at problems very differently, which has been incredibly valuable in many situations. So I've often had to overcome adversity, particularly in the workplace when it comes to proofreading emails or sending out reports. I've been picked up on really minor grammatical errors that some people care a huge amount about, and I've had to sort of explain to them, it's not me being lazy, I just physically can't see it. And I've come up with a lot of coping mechanisms for that. So I use a tool in Microsoft Word that reads to me. So it reads back everything I've written, because I can hear when something's wrong, but I can't see it. Right. And I think come across adversity being a woman in civil engineering, but I don't want to dwell on it too much. I think ultimately everyone will have something that makes them different and that will cause them challenges in a society where we sort of tend towards the norm. And all you have to do is find ways to, gently overcome each of those steps. And whether it's about getting Microsoft Word to read to you, or finding ways of communicating with conviction when potentially you're feeling undermined, you just have to keep taking that on board and keep finding new little tools. But it's always a learning journey, so it's worth going through the process yourself. I'm deeply grateful that I live in a society now where it's not as bad as it was for women, as it could have been 50, 60 years ago. I caught up with my grandmother. I speak to her quite a lot, and I asked her about what her job used to be like. And for all intents and purposes, she was incredibly successful as a woman for the time of that she was living in. But if that was today, she would have been CEO of some massive company, whereas she was PA to the guy, the head of Tesco's. Which is still amazing, but
absolutely. And as you say, in context of the time, is huge.
Yeah, and it's the journey she took to get there that I think fascinates me. But just thinking what she could have achieved if it was a more equal society back then.
I did notice that you said obviously that a teacher suggested to you obviously engineering at school. I mean, from several people I've spoken to, engineers who are women in the industry, they didn't have that actually, and it was a career that was more suggested to to men, whether that's, you know, on purpose or just the way, you know, the sort of associated stereotype. But I mean, it's great that you did have that.
I mean, to be fair, it was the same in my school. I was very baffled because I caught up with some of the guys in my year, and they said, yeah, our school was an engineering school. And I was like, was it? No one mentioned engineering to me sort of in a structured way. It was just this teacher who was, my parents are teachers as well. So my dad had obviously mentioned to him that I was struggling with career choices. But the rest of the girls in my year who were very sciencey were pushed to medicine or pure sciences, not engineering. Ironically, 4 of them have become engineers, but not through any efforts of our school. Yeah. So I think that's changing. I think we're starting to see engineering recommended to girls a lot more because it is an amazing career. But I think back when I was at school, it was still a problem that it wasn't really seen as a career for women.
Got you. I mean, I was looking through, we were chatting beforehand about all the things that Qualis do. And you've mentioned the industry still uses a lot of paper, which I found fascinating, which seems crazy to me. Is that a particular challenge?
Yes. So obviously we're a data science company for all intents and purposes, but we obviously use software to get that data science into the hands of people on site. But the big challenge when we first started building Qflow was that we wanted to draw in all this data on the impact of construction. So the materials, the waste, everything that contributes to the overall footprint of a development. And what we found, probably not that unsurprisingly, is that everything is still documented by paper. Even though they are gently trying to move to digital systems, things like waste transfer notes, which is the documentation that proves that you've handled your waste legally, is still a paper form. And so getting digital insights out of that is impossible. So what Qflow has done is it's developed a piece of machine learning, much like Receipt Bank or any of those systems that read tickets, but for reading these very dodgy waste transfer notes. I say dodgy because they're handwritten, a lot
Probably
of them.
With muddy hands, possibly on a wet building site.
Covered in mud. It's an interesting part of the industry's challenges, but it's one that the industry knows it has to overcome, and we're really excited to be part of that journey and helping them overcome some of these more antiquated issues.
See, I find that fascinating because obviously, you know, as somebody that works, you know, most of the time 9 to 5 in an office, you know, everything is paperless these days. So it's fascinating to me that, you know, that there are still these sort of like little holdouts where everything's done on paper. So obviously, I mean, there's I assume a green benefit to that, but I mean, I'm assuming there's other green benefits to the technology.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned earlier, I'm a bit of a sustainability nut. The reason that we started Qflow was with the main purpose of making the construction industry more sustainable. When we started digging into why is the industry not very sustainable, we realised it was sort of 2 core things. One was that there didn't seem to be the access to sort of technology and new materials and those different aspects so that they could physically build more sustainably. The other part was that the business case didn't seem to be there. Like, people didn't believe that there was a cost or a social benefit to being more sustainable. Now, there are great technologies out there. So you've got things like Sem-Free, which has a much lower carbon footprint than normal cement. So you can use it in concrete to have a much greener development, as it were. And lots of great new materials. So we didn't want to go down that road, but we wanted to make sure that the business case of sustainability was compelling enough for this industry to act and actually take on those new materials. So that's what Qflow does. So Qflow captures all the information around the materials that are being used, the waste that's being generated, the emissions associated with all these activities. And then we quantify it and we nail it back to genuine cost and productivity impacts in the construction process. So we can say, like, if you took your waste to this place instead of this place, you would be saving £96,000, but you'd also be saving 100,000 kilograms of CO2 emissions. And so you can really nail that in something that's quantified. And that is a much more compelling case to the CEO of some big construction company than be sustainable because it's good. So we wanted to make that more tangible, and that is what Qflow is doing.
And has there been quite a lot of surprise from industry? Have they been surprised at the benefits and the cost saving.
Yeah, it's been really fun. So we worked on HS2. We're still working on HS2.
Wow.
And we did sort of like a 3-month study on one of their demolition sites. And we took all that data and we said, okay, what can we tell them as like small actions that they can take to try and improve their carbon? Because that was one of the big questions that we were trying to answer. And we put together this little dashboard. It was really simple. It was in Power BI. It was nothing super sexy. But we took this to this presentation and we said, okay, like these are the 3 top things that we think you could do to reduce carbon, and these are the cost savings as a result of that. This guy came over the table and he was like, oh my God, like I didn't know that we could like knew this. And I was like, yeah, like it's your data. We've not generated anything new. We've just taken the data that you've been generating in paper and we've digitized it, yeah. But then we've used that data in a clever way to try and give you something compelling that you can then take to your board and say, we need to change this so that we can achieve that. And the response from the industry has just been overwhelming. It's so exciting. We just want to get out on more sites and show more people. That's
going to be very satisfying for you.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's really fun. It makes it all worth it, because there are days when you're like, how is this so slow and messy as an industry? But then when you get one response like that, you're like, okay, it's all worth it. They get it. We're on the right track.
Fantastic. And you mentioned to me earlier, which I had no idea about. I'm sure people in construction it's very obvious, but to me it wasn't. So to a layperson that doesn't know, you mentioned rework on building sites being a problem and how the technology benefits that. Could you expand on that? Because that I found really interesting.
Yeah, if anyone's interested in digging into the statistics on this, McKinsey brought out a very good report recently on rework in the construction industry. Ultimately, what happens is it's a complex process. A small error will occur, so maybe the wrong materials delivered to site, or it gets built in the wrong place. Terrifyingly, that happens more often than you'd think. And then that gets checked during an audit and they go, hang on a minute, this is wrong, so we're going to have to redo this section, or we're going to have to fudge it around this thing. So the bit of rework that Qflow most focus on right now is this material delivery piece. So a lot of construction teams are trying to be more sustainable. So Canary Wharf has this requirement for FSC certified timber, which just means that timber has come from a renewable forest. It's not from the rainforest or anything dodgy like that. It's really sustainable, reusable timber. But tracking that, again, still done by paper. So they often end up with uncertified timber coming onto site and not finding out about it before it's then installed in the building. So then what do? Do you rip out the timber, generating a lot of waste, having to generate even more materials to be used, or do you leave it in there and miss your sustainability target? And so these sorts of conflicts happen a huge amount on construction sites. So what Qflow does is it just says, by the way, you've just had a delivery, it doesn't meet your project certification, so you need to take it off the site. And just by catching that error before it becomes a risk to the project, eliminates the rework, saves the waste, and everyone's happy. So yeah,
I mean, you'd be amazed that the items don't come onto site the way, I mean, these days, 90% of deliveries I get to my front door, someone puts a keypad in, well, they used to, or they don't at the moment, but they used to put a keypad in my hand and I would scratch the little pen and one assumes that's all, digitally stored in the ether. I mean, the thought of these, do you know what, the slightly anal organised person in me, I literally wince at the thought of these screwed up bits of paper with mud spatters and ink spots on them. So
yeah, I mean, so if you look at it for the construction industry, right? So the retail industry adopted barcodes really early on, and that has enabled the industry as a whole to get really coordinated on this. I mean, I have an app on my phone that means I can scan the barcode of my food and it will tell me the nutrition content in it. And that's only possible because the whole of the retail industry has made it open source as to what their data is, and they've made it a sort of consistent format in barcodes. Now, the construction industry doesn't have that yet. It's tried it a few times and failed disastrously. And the reason being is that the supply chain in construction is so fragmented. and it relies so much on very, very small companies that haven't been able to digitize yet. The investment hasn't been there, the profits aren't there for them to actually overhaul their paper-based system and make it digital. Means that we're stuck in this position where we're using paper tickets. And so even if you get the big guys like Travis Perkins digitizing their whole system, you're still getting timber from Bob down the road, and he still has paper filing tickets. And it's where the industry is trying to go, but it's not there yet. And so we need to have bridging technology, which is what Qflow is right now, is a bridging technology between the paper-based system and a fully digital system, enabling the industry to get there, but still get the valuable data insights and still be sustainable in the meantime.
Fantastic. See, I find all that completely fascinating. I've got to be honest with you. That's the bit that really, and the thought of all these buildings that you see, you drive past these incredibly professional, sleek-looking building sites, and to think that, as you say, like mistakes of that scale could happen. We just built this in the wrong bit. I just find that fascinating.
Yeah, terrifying.
So, I mean, obviously, you're a civil engineer by training, but also now you're more of an entrepreneur as well. Would you encourage other engineers to work with technology providers in that way?
So I know we talked about this earlier, but one of the main things that I want to encourage people, particularly young people coming into the industry, is to question the way that things have always been done. I was so enthusiastic when I came out of university. I was like, I've learned all this cool stuff about technology and systems thinking, and the industry is going to be so great in 5 years' time. And then you get sucked into the industry and they're like, but we've always done it this way. It's not going to change. This is just how we do it. And it's very easy to sort of give in to that and actually say, oh, okay, fine, I'll fix it next time. And I just really want to encourage people to keep saying, but why? Why have we always done it this way? Like we have this technology that can help us do it better. And ultimately, that's why Jade and I started Qflow, is we kept being told, well, we don't have that data. We can't do it that way. We don't do it that way. And we were like, you know what? Screw you guys. I'm going to go find the data and we're going to change the way we do this because it can be better. And we couldn't change our companies from inside at that point. We had to go outside and start our own company to do it. But that's not always the case. So if you are in the engineering industry and you think you found a problem and you think you found a solution to that problem as well, and it's a problem worth solving, then firstly, try and solve it within your company, because you're going to have it so much easier if you can use their resources and their clout and their intellect to really leverage that. But if you can't, if you find that they're just not budging, then you have every opportunity to go and start your own thing. And investment in construction tech, in engineering tech is just booming right now. People want to reinvigorate this old industry that's got stuck. So if anyone wants to find out about innovating and entrepreneurship in this space, and you think you've got a problem worth solving, then I'm more than happy to talk to people, because I wish I'd known more about it at university, and I wish I'd understood the opportunities out there, and that it's not like this dark art that no one, like, you have to be on the inside to be able to do it. Like, we blundered into entrepreneurship not knowing what to do. But once you're in the community, everyone is so supportive that I never knew what a cash flow model was or how to build one. 2 years in, I use it every day to try and keep the company alive. And so you'll learn on the job, but it's worth it for those moments when someone at HS2 comes over to your table and goes, "Oh my God, you fixed this problem." I'm like, yes, I have.
Absolutely. No, fantastic. I was going to say at this point as well, if anybody has any questions, please do submit them, because we're at a time now where we can start looking at those. I do actually have one, which sort of picks up on what we were talking about a moment ago. So, Brittany, I'll go ahead and hit you with this. So, Reese Phillips says, quick question on the fragmented nature of the supply chain in construction. To what extent would you say the onus is on large firms to invest in digitizing their supply chain partners? And how would you make the business case for that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something that's talked about a huge amount in the industry right now. So there's an organisation called I3P, which is really trying to support this coming together and digitisation of the supply chain and incentivising that properly in procurement. And that whole thing about the big companies investing in the little companies to digitise, it's meant to be done through procurement mechanisms, but you have to have so much buying power to really leverage that. what we've seen is that where you've got mega projects like HS2, they're able to do that quite effectively, and they can push the supply chain to improve. But again, when you go far enough down the supply chain into the really small SMEs, that money isn't really making its way there. And to do it for one client isn't enough of an incentive. So we need to find other ways of helping them digitize and of coming together. So another initiative that's been introduced is the Supply Chain Sustainability School, and other sort of supply chain schools that try and get these organisations to band together and figure out the most cost-effective way for them to do it, and then sort of step forward that way. But in reality, it's a bit of both. So I think the procurement process needs to allow that money to filter down a bit more effectively for them to invest again. And this industry runs on such tight margins that it's just not happened yet. But equally, if you're going to survive and thrive as a small SME in this industry, you also need to try and take that step to do it yourself and invest a little bit of that capital to take on an innovation. And weirdly, I actually think the SMEs are better at this than some of the big companies. So we work with an organisation called Hanson Contracting, and they just jumped at the idea of being able to digitise part of their process. And they had the vision to say, yeah, this is going to make us a more attractive provider for our clients further down the line. So we're going to try and put a bit of capital into this right now. And as a small company, we're willing to take some of the hit on that margin to really help them do that, because we see the benefit to us. So there's no simple answer, but really it's about everyone taking a little bit of the hit and collaborating together to try and lift the industry as a whole. Sorry, that was quite a roundabout answer, but
No, it makes complete sense. I mean, you'll always come up against the sort of old guard, I guess, that aren't as keen on adopting new technology, and those that, you know, can see the way forward. And I think that's probably quite a broad theme across engineering in general, but also, I mean, really across a lot of industries.
yeah.
You know, I work for I won't name names, but I work for a wonderful society that I absolutely love, but it's 200 and something years old, 214, 15 years old, and there is so much sort of antiquated process, as you say earlier. You know, just this is how we've done it, and it can be a process to get change, but as ever, it's always worth it. You know,
yeah, and I think it's the really big organisations like HS2 and Tideway who will actually set aside money to try and do that, and they do, and the government's quite good at pushing them to do that as well, and say you've got to invest in SMEs. So Network Rail has a clear mandate. You have to have a certain number of SMEs on your books, and they have to be innovative in this way. So it is happening through procurement processes, but probably not quick enough, and that's where we need the small guys to step up as well and kind of meet in the middle.
Makes absolute sense. So I was just going to loop just back a tiny bit really quickly on just one thing before we move on. You obviously talk about your route into civil engineering and how you ended up where you are today. Do you think, slightly broad question, but do you think that for other people coming into the industry, young women perhaps especially, but really anybody, do you think there is still a huge way for this industry to grow? Is this the tip of the iceberg? Or, you know, do you think once this is done, then that's it, problem solved, and there's nowhere to really grow? Does that make sense? It's a very big question.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that it's an industry that is constantly evolving, you know, even as you say, at a slow pace.
Yeah.
Is there still a good horizon out there?
So it's been interesting. I think lockdown and, you know, the ongoing impacts of COVID-19 have triggered a few things in this industry that are really interesting. So we've been talking about the skills gap in construction and civil engineering for a long time, where ultimately we've got a lot of very senior people who are going to retire soon, and then we have some middle managers, but like we're really struggling to attract people at the bottom of the scale. And so there's a big gap in the knowledge and skills. So these guys are tech savvy, the old guys are not. Like they really do struggle with a lot of the tech adoption, but then like there's not enough of these guys coming up to take up the slack of all the infrastructure work that we have going on. But COVID and lockdown have really pushed us to digitize a lot of our processes. And so a lot of the digital startups in construction are actually benefiting from some of the challenges we've seen. But what that also means is that the type of role that is in civil engineering has changed. So to be a civil engineer or to work in the construction and civil engineering space, you don't have to be someone who designs concrete beams or someone who is super into like cross-laminate timber.
Because that's how I imagine it, as someone from the outside.
You don't have to be either sat on AutoCAD or in a field with muddy boots on. You can actually be a software engineer, and there is a whole other part of the civil engineering industry that is about to explode, and it's exploding in the startup space. So if you're really interested in it, then like talk to me and I'll introduce you to like 100 startups that are in this space that are looking for great people. But I think the big companies like Multiplex and Skanska and Bureau Happold, they're just starting to hire these sort of software and data science roles because they see that the industry as a whole is changing. So like the civil and construction industry is not going anywhere. We're always going to need to maintain our existing infrastructure and build new infrastructure as technology changes. But the roles in that industry are going to change drastically, and they already are. So if it's a space that you're interested in, but you're more into like software, or, I mean, my favorite one is Arup have hired a DJ to be an acoustics engineer in, I think he's working on one of the Australian opera houses. But yeah, they hired a DJ because he had this amazing acoustic engineering skills, and now he works for a civil engineering company. So that these kinds of jobs are going to just be opening up everywhere. So if you're a young person that's interested in the industry but doesn't want to be a civil engineer, that's fine. This is such a cool industry to be in, no matter what.
You can just imagine when he told his mum, I'm going to be a DJ, and she probably went, oh no, please don't. An acoustic engineer, which looks, very impressive on a CV.
Yeah, there you go.
You touched earlier on your hobbies, actually. You mentioned musical theatre, and I know you're a singer-songwriter. Is there any crossover there with work?
Yeah, well, I mean, musical theatre and I'm sort of a folk songwriter as well. It's all about storytelling. And we as humans are just so compelled to listen and share stories. We love storytelling. It's probably the thing that we've done longest other than hunting. And I think the way that you change an industry that is so cemented, forgive the pun, in its old ways, for them to really want to step out of that and take on something that is challenging and different for them, they need a compelling reason as to why. And the way that you really engage people is storytelling. So I would say the majority of what I do day to day is storytelling, either to our clients or to my team internally, trying to get them to come on this journey with us to change this industry, to make it more sustainable. And the skills of, just communicating and being able to rationalize quite complex ideas into something that is compelling and sexy, all come from musical theatre.
And do you find in the industry that is, obviously it's a very, very, very useful skill to have, but forgive the generalization, but that's probably not a skill that's as plentiful in your industry for others as perhaps it could be. So does that put you slightly further ahead?
In many respects, yeah. You'll find they often say there's two types of engineers. There's like the deeply technical ones who maybe struggle with the communication side of things, or there's the deeply creative engineers who are far more communicators, but maybe less fixated on the technical side. So I think those engineers who are far more into the creative communication are the ones who will step out, and they'll be leading clients on crazy missions to build mad things. And you'll find the technical engineers are actually taking on some of the really, really complex challenges. But there's a place for both types of engineers, and I think communication is going to be important no matter what you do.
Excellent. Well, I just had another question come in, so let's go with that. What were the challenges in starting a new business and developing it into the position that it's in now? So that's definitely, definitely on the entrepreneurial side of things.
How long have you got? There are plenty of challenges. I think the first one we came up against is we didn't know what we were doing. We were civil engineers and environmental scientists, and we didn't know things like what's a cash flow or an investment deck. So the first thing is just learning the space, but that's the same with everything. And what's great about this industry is there are so many people who've done it before and they've been through that pain, and so they want to share. And I'm in that position now where I'm now mentoring younger entrepreneurs who are 2 years behind me, and I can say, don't panic. We got this. It's not as scary as it looks. I think the sort of really big hurdles or milestones that you come across with any industry or any sort of new business or venture is nailing down, like really being sure that the problem you're solving is worth solving. And I actually think that's harder than a lot of people think, because it might be a pain for you, but is it a pain for everyone else? And is it a pain that people are willing to pay to solve? So nailing the problem and then nailing the solution. Never try and pin yourself to one solution. So the way that Qflow works is we're technology agnostic. We literally don't care what technology we use. We just
as long as it works.
Yeah, literally. And the thing is, we've seen a lot of startups fail because they've been like, I've got this great solution, but they haven't got the problem to solve with that solution. So they're trying to fit the square peg in the round hole. Yeah. Whereas we've said, right, we have this problem. What are the various ways we can solve it? And then which of those various ways works best for the industry? So we've been incredibly industry-led. And I think that worked really well for us and for the construction industry. I'm not saying that's right for every industry, but particularly once you've nailed the problem, make sure the solution is one that's going to work for the space that you're trying to deploy it in. Because there are a million ways to fix a problem, but not all of them are going to be acceptable to the people who are going to be using it. Once you've nailed those two, it should be relatively easy. I mean, getting your first client, we were so lucky with Canary Wharf, because it was a cold contact on LinkedIn. We had hit on something that they found really, really painful and were willing to pay for us to fix. And so once you have that first client, it's much easier to go to others and say, well, Canary Wharf trust us, so there we go. And sort of building those relationships and building on that base of evidence that gives people confidence that you do know what you're doing, and believing that you do know what you're doing, although even though it feels like you don't, actually, we know so much more about the problems across every single construction site than someone who is just working on one construction site. And it's a weird thing to get your head around, because you always think they know more than you. But the more we've seen this one problem, I know more about this one problem than anyone else in the industry. I don't know more about their whole construction site, but I know more about this one problem. And it's okay to know the differences between that and have that conversation. So then once you've sort of nailed all that down, it's the horrible grind of getting someone to invest in you if you want to scale faster than just organic traffic. And then building a team and compelling, like bringing them on that journey and getting someone who is mad enough to come and work for you and commit their time and their effort to build something that you believe is going to work, and you've got to convince them too. So I say they're the sort of like the four core first challenges you're going to come across.
Just the four first.
The four first, there's many afterwards.
Gosh.
But they're all fun.
Yeah, enjoy it. You did hit on something really interesting then, although I've literally just shot out of my mind. I was so interested that it's flown straight out of my brain. But no, that was it. You mentioned about hitting on, you don't have to know everything, but it's that one thing that you know that's really specific to you. A friend of mine is a mechanical engineer, and he works in oil drilling. And he basically, the thing he does for horizontal drilling, he's one of like 3 people in the world that is trained in this one tiny specific thing. But, that makes him incredibly useful and incredibly valuable, because actually, all these larger firms do still require this one. So I think what you said is an interesting lesson to people who perhaps are looking to come into this space. You don't have to know everything, but you have to know, broadly, obviously, and then really be able to solve a problem or be an expert in one area.
Yeah.
So I thought that was particularly interesting.
Yeah, I think it's I think that's one of the things we found most difficult actually was, and it might well have bits to do with being women working in civil engineering, and obviously the sort of insecurities that can come with that. But having the conviction to say, no, we definitely do know this, and being open enough and open to people's feedback and hearing what they're saying, because they do know their construction project better, but having the conviction and the confidence to really hold your ground and say, no, this really is a problem, and just asking the right questions. And the best thing to do in any situation is ask the right questions so that they tell you it's a problem. Don't just tell them it's a problem, otherwise they'll be like, what do you know? And you're like, oh,
yeah,
okay.
I think that's very important. I think that's a very key thing for life. I think that is great.
Yeah.
You get a lot further with people by asking the right questions and then highlighting the issue than you do just peddling in and telling people that they're wrong. We've had another question come in. This one is from Kerry Mugford. Did your engineering education prepare you for the challenges you faced in the real world? Do you have suggestions for students to help them prepare? What a great question.
That's a really good question.
Isn't it? It's a big question.
Yes and no.
Okay.
So I think I studied at the University of Bristol. It's a fantastic civil engineering degree, and I do think I learned a huge amount on that course. However, I would not have been prepared for engineering life if I hadn't done summer placements. So in my first and second summers, I worked for Mott MacDonald and Network Rail. And I learned more in those summers than I probably learned in the entirety of my engineering degree. But I wouldn't have been able to do it without the engineering degree. So they kind of go hand in hand. And then in my third year, I went to work on site in Hong Kong with Laing O'Rourke. Wow. And that was mind blowing. And that gave me an appreciation of the other side of engineering that I until then hadn't really fully appreciated, the on-site side. And I would not have been able to do so much of what I do now without having had that experience. So I think, civil engineering degrees are important to understand the fundamentals and a lot of theory and to be able to speak the language, but there is nothing more valuable than just getting out and doing it and doing work placements and these. As long as you're a good, sensible human being, you should be able to get a work placement somewhere. It is hard, and I'm not saying you can just walk in, but you have to write a good application and talk to the right people. But I think if you're a student looking to really understand whether this is the right industry for you and get the most out of it, then do work placements 100%, even if it's just a few weeks free.
Yeah. I mean, as with so many things, you need the academic side, and, there's no replacement for real life experience. So yeah, it all comes together.
Yeah.
Well, Brittany, it's been great talking to you. We are coming towards the end of our time, but thank you ever so much for agreeing to come on. And I hope everybody watching has found this useful. Please feel free to share it. The webinars will of course be going up online. Next Tuesday, Fayon will be here talking with Megan Whitbread about her nomination for Engineering Apprentice of the Year. So tying in with what we were just talking about there with study. And until then, it's goodbye. And we look forward to finally being able to celebrate the awards with you later this year. So that's bye from me. Thanks so much, Brittany, and everyone.
Cheers, watching. David. Cheers, guys. Nice to see you.
Bye.